Hello and welcome to Bidgely Engage Plus. I'm Neil Strother. I'm coming to you today from St. Louis, Missouri, where the SECC is holding its annual fall workshop. I'll be speaking with Heather Mulligan from Puget Sound Energy. She'll be talking about transportation electrification programs at that utility. I'll also be speaking with Nathan Shannon, the CEO of the SECC, and we'll be talking about EVs as well. Well, Heather, thanks a lot for joining us here today. I'm really excited to hear about what's happening at Puget Sound Energy and your electrification plans around transportation.
So Puget Sound Energy is a utility located up in Washington State, a very green state in more ways than one. We cover most of Western Washington, and we have some very progressive, green-minded companies who are really looking to make a difference in the world, so they expect their utility to help them.
You know, the Puget Sound area is very environmentally friendly. Can you talk a little bit about how that impetus informs what you're doing and your long-term plans for net zero?
Puget Sound Energy has an aspirational goal of being beyond net zero by 2045. And so what that really means is that we're going to take every step we can to reduce carbon from our electric and gas sources. We believe that we need to go together with our customers to achieve these beyond net zero goals. It really is going to be a partnership, working hand in hand with Puget Sound Energy, helping to provide solutions to these customers to achieve their own goals as well as the goals of the region. Customers are really looking to reduce their carbon footprint, and obviously transportation is a major driver for that carbon footprint.
Are there particular municipalities or some of their needs that intersect with what you're doing? And can you talk a little bit about what you've discovered with them?
So we've been reaching out to a lot of our very green municipalities with sustainability plans to figure out how we can help them to achieve that through the energy that they're using and their transportation electrification plans. How can we provide charging solutions that allow them to electrify their fleets, the schools in their community, businesses in their community? All of that makes a big difference. But we're not going to get there alone. We do need to work together with our customers.
Tell us a bit about the transportation electrification program at PSE.
So PSE launched our first transportation electrification programs back in 2018 with the set of 5 pilots to help our customers to electrify and charge their vehicles at home, where they work, or out in the public. And since then, we've been working to build on those pilots, take what we've learned, and offer new services to fill in the gaps.
And talk a little bit about how you reached out to that community in terms of getting their input and their understanding of where the market is and where they could be in that.
We thought it was really important to hear directly from the customers that we were trying to serve. So we reached out and set up some community engagement with the service providers and then with the customers that we were trying to serve through these products and services. We've been trying to get out there more in the community and talk to our customers. Unfortunately, with COVID, ride and drives are not what they used to be. So we've had to be a little more creative, innovative on how we approach those customers. Things like virtual ride and drives, incentives to encourage customers to get out there and try to test drive a vehicle directly through the dealership, but also providing web tools for our customers so that they can understand the total cost of ownership and what that would look like for them.
So tell us a little bit about what you've done with the community feedback you got and how that's informing your current plans.
We start first by reaching out to the community-based organizations that serve our highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations to understand what they're hearing from those people that they serve around electric vehicles, if anything, right? But what do they know? So really interviewing them, talking to them about what they're hearing. And then we take that to the next step and we actually talk through workshops and focus groups, we're actually talking to the customers that we're trying to serve to better understand their high-level needs and how we can best help support them in this transition. It's an iterative process. We're taking the information that they're providing us and we're using that to inform product design, and then we're taking that product design back to these same populations and asking them for more feedback and making sure that we're hearing them and really bringing their input into the process.
Can you talk about maybe the top 2 or 3 specific either barriers or issues or myths that are kind of holding them back that help you kind of like, okay, how can we get them beyond that barrier or that issue?
The number one barrier is definitely cost. And so we understand that we're going to need to not only provide the infrastructure for them to charge and to see that they have charging solutions where they need them, but that they also have support in purchasing vehicles. Or maybe it's not even a vehicle. Maybe it's an electric bike or an electric scooter so that they can get to the transit center where hopefully there will be an electric bus waiting for them to get them where they need to go.
What have you learned about what customers expect when they're charging an EV if they've never had to do it at home or at a public place?
I think one of the important things to remember is that if somebody doesn't have charging available to them at home, then they're going to need to find alternatives for that charging. And if they're reliant on public charging, then it's going to cost that consumer probably more. Public charging is a wonderful asset to have out there when people are traveling and they need to charge up quickly on their journey or as they're driving around during the day. But as a single source for charging, that can be the more expensive way to go. And so there's an equity issue there. We need to make sure that everybody has access to level 2 charging where they can plug in at night or when they can take more time to get that full charge, and then they can use the public charging system to supplement that.
In the back to work scenario, post-COVID or whatever we want to call the era we're in now, have you seen transportation change, and how do EVs fit into this kind of, some people work part-time in the office, they're at home. How has that changed kind of the map that you're looking at?
We launched a pilot program in 2019 expecting to do 50 workplace charging sites and 25 multifamily charging sites. This was just really getting underway as COVID hit. And what we very quickly saw was that people weren't in the workplace anymore, and that a lot of those property managers just didn't even know what their future was going to look like. So that was interesting, but then we also were seeing a lot more interest than we had anticipated from the multifamily sector. And we quickly had to pivot and put more emphasis on putting charging in those multifamily properties and backing off a little on the workplace. We still think workplace is really an important segment to meet. You know, there's still people going into offices, maybe not as frequently, but when they go, they want to have those charging resources. So we're going to continue to focus on how we can support that. But I think right now it's more important to focus on making sure that everybody has a charging solution at home, out in the public, and then really focusing on those fleets, because those fleet managers are ready to move now.
Talk a little bit now on the charging piece in the home and in multifamily situations. How do I charge it at home?
Yeah, we're launching a set of programs in 2023 focused on expanding access for multifamily customers, because it is easier for somebody living in a single-family residential home to think about how they're going to charge their vehicle. Even if they don't have a level 2 charger, they probably have access to a plug where they can even do it on a 110 outlet. But for the multifamily customer, you know, that feels more out of reach for them. We're also learning that for a multifamily customer, there needs to be some flexibility in the charging infrastructure that's available to them. In some cases, those folks are shift workers, and so their hours are very different than, the traditional 9 to 5 work day. So they need to know that when they come home, they have a charger to plug into, and that their rates are going to be the same as if they were charging at home. So we want to make sure that everybody feels like they have access to charging. So we're going to be working to put charging into those multifamily properties in partnership with, of course, the multifamily property managers. But what we're finding is that a lot of those property managers, this is not the thing that they do day to day. They don't know where to start, or it's just not something that they want to spend a lot of time thinking about. So if we can come in and partner with them and make it easy, then that's ideal. And we're going to have options for them. We can either come in and do the make ready and they can own the charging assets, or we can come in and do the whole package for them and own and maintain those chargers. But regardless, we're going to make sure that those customers of both the property manager and Puget Sound Energy have access to charging where they live.
Okay, so we know that an inflection point is coming in terms of EV charging. How is Puget Sound Energy planning to handle that increased load?
So we already have 70,000 electric vehicles on the road in Washington state, and our governor has, put a stake in the ground and said that there's going to be a lot more. In fact, every new vehicle sold will need to be EV by a certain date. So we need to start thinking about that impact on the grid and how we manage for that. And we are giving a lot of thought to load management. How do you help consumers to charge off-peak? Through a residential pilot program, we tested how incentives would work for encouraging our customers to charge off-peak. And we took a lot of good information away from that pilot that we'll be using to really think through how we continue to offer solutions to customers to encourage that off-peak charging. That's going to be really important with fleets as well. As you see more fleets electrifying, they come back to the yard at night, but they don't all need to plug in at the same time. So how can those fleets manage their charging to get the best value for both the customer and to support the grid infrastructure?
So as we wrap up here, any key takeaways for other utilities who are on this journey as well?
Yes, absolutely. Utilities need to provide solutions for all of their customers and make sure that they don't leave anybody behind. And in order to do that, I think it's really important to hear directly from those customers, understand what their needs are, and meet them where they're at. And then I think we'll all be successful.
That was very informative, what Heather is doing with Puget Sound Energy and their transportation electrification program. Now we'll find out from Nathan what the research shows from what consumers want in EVs. So tell me a little bit about the latest research on EVs that you've come across.
So this last study was fielded at the end of 2021, released in January, and it was a look into adopters and non-adopters of electric vehicles.
Was there any big surprise or surprises in that survey that came back that you said, wow, I didn't really think of that or didn't see that coming?
Those of us that are in this industry, we always assume that people know more about energy technology than they do. So my biggest surprise was the fact that only about 26% of people actually knew someone with an EV. So these are the folks that don't drive an EV. Only 26% even knew a family member, a friend, a colleague, a coworker that had an EV. And only about 17% had ridden in one and 9% have driven one. So I was just surprised at how low that number was. In previous research, that wouldn't have surprised me, but for 2022, I was thinking at this point, more people had experience with electric vehicles than they did.
Anything else jump out?
Mainly just not knowing how to work chargers. It wasn't even the access to a charger. There is that issue in rural areas, but a lot of people just had a fear of not knowing how to operate them with many different apps that you may need on your phone. And the folks that didn't really understand they could have a charger at home. A lot of people didn't even know that that was an option.
Yeah, that is a bit surprising.
Consumers had very, very little knowledge of. Even some of the customers of the 1,000 that we surveyed that had an EV had confusion between quick charge, level 1, level 2, that type of thing. There definitely needs to be more education on the charging levels and even there were consumers that we talked to that had an electric vehicle that they didn't understand that when you're just plugging it into a 110 volt outlet, that car is going to take 15, 20 hours to charge. That was a little bit of a shock to people who are looking to purchase an EV. They were even the ones that had an EV, they didn't realize that it was that lengthy of time unless you actually install that level 2 charger. So I haven't seen a lot of education just on charging in general, and that was one of the areas that I really think could use a lot of assistance.
Yeah, so it sounds like there is that impetus or that need for utilities and their partners to really get the messaging out there that you think people know about EVs, and many don't.
Right.
You know,
we assume that.
They assume that, yeah, right.
Yeah, definitely a large education gap. One is experience in that electric vehicle. If we can get people to experience it, adoption I think would be through the roof compared to what it is right now. So yeah, EV drive events, I know a lot of utilities, and especially cooperatives. Cooperatives have been, I think, the most innovative, where you can take an EV home overnight, or just test out charging. They'll even show you, they'll have like lessons on how to charge, what this is like, that whole experience. So I've seen a lot of cooperatives do great work in
that basic blocking and tackling.
Right.
And I think you're right. I think the cooperatives tend to be a little more down to earth, or they can be more flexible.
Yeah, they're very flexible.
A little more nimble.
Exactly.
Looking kind of at the survey and thinking maybe longer term, any thoughts on where the market or where you think the adoption will be in 5, 10, 20 years?
We're looking at almost 50% of the customers we're surveying saying that within the next 3 years, they're interested in getting an electric vehicle. I could see within 5 years, adoption rates definitely having a big jump, just mainly because of the types of electric vehicles that are coming out right now. The fact that they're offering cars that look like internal combustion engine cars, that's helping the adoption rate jump up quite a bit.
So I would think that the manufacturers, the utilities, all the people in this value chain, this next 3 to 5 years looks pretty opportunistic.
Definitely. I mean, there's tons of people on a waiting list right now waiting to get Ford Lightning or other cars. I mean, there's several that are out there that people are dying to get their hands on. So I think the waiting lists alone show that there's increased interest.
And I was a little surprised that I think the South region had a little stronger adoption. Did you notice that?
Georgia in particular had an extremely high adoption rate because we had a very generous tax credit a few years back. It was on top of the $7,500 federal credit, you got an additional $5,000 tax credit from the state. So with that combined, it was almost a no-brainer to get an EV, or you even get counted on a lease too. So it made it very, very affordable to get a lease, and I think that's what really drove the adoption. And then all the folks that ended up getting an EV, it basically forced the infrastructure of charging to be installed quicker, I think, than a lot of other states. But that could be another reason for the South being pretty high adoption, because South has a pretty reliable grid, and it's a newer grid. We don't have a lot of outages, really, less than the Northeast. The Northeast is the oldest grid in the U.S., so they're going to have the most issues when it comes to maybe longer outages that could affect your charging.
After all the research you've done, what would be a big takeaway for utilities that are just starting on this journey or still getting their feet wet?
I think the biggest thing for utilities to recognize is that customers are not a monolith. They need to target their marketing and outreach and education to the customers who are in that moment of looking to purchase an EV. So personalization around the messaging is very important. So if there's any data that a utility could use to target messaging to customers, or just target educational components about electric vehicles, I would say that's the biggest takeaway. I mean, with usage data, if they are able to understand and tell that person, as they're charging a car, or what times they're charging a car, offering rates that can help them with saving energy around those times is so important. So the personalization side is kind of what we can't stress enough when it comes to EVs and just getting that educational component out there.
It sounds like it's an opportunity, too, for utilities to really hone in on that rate, if you will, and really help the user that has a new EV, when to charge, how that's going to affect their bill, et cetera, et cetera.
customers love that. They love that tangible look into, okay, if I have an EV, if I charge my EV 3 nights a week, this is what my bill is going to look like. And it's a good comparison for them too, to say, I spent X amount on gas for my combustion car, now I'm spending this amount on electricity. And it's a gateway to other engagement too for utilities. The customers that already has the EV, really, they're that low-hanging fruit that a utility could talk to about more engagement, signing up for programs, because they're already very engaged with their energy usage. It's something that they're thinking about already as an EV owner.
And I think you made a good point. It seems like a smart utility would give those kind of consistent but friendly nudges and of information that helps that consumer, and that it just builds more trust. And as you say, oh, you're interested, you have an EV, would you be interested in solar or vice versa? Right,
exactly. Solar, storage, smart thermostat programs, any kind of connected home devices, those are the folks that are going to be the easy ones to market to.
You want to play the future game with me? Any thoughts on when you see a pretty major inflection point in EV adoption?
I think we're at it right now.
Oh, okay.
I would say maybe within the next year, if we can continue to do some of the educational work that I was talking about, that type of area that type of work will really increase adoption within the next year. So I think we're kind of at a good precipice for a big spike in the adoption just within the next year or so.
Thank you for joining us at Bidgely Engage Plus. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. I'll see you next time from Duquesne Light.